It now gives me great pleasure to introduce our keynote speakers for today, Dr. Giedre and her student colleague, Ursula Axel, both from the University of Technology, Sydney. As I'm sure you're already aware, this keynote is called Lemons, Limes and Liminality, Encounters in the Third Space. It tackles our paradox theme of the roundtable by looking into the grey area of partnership that still exists between structured learning and the unstructured messiness of the big, scary real world that a lot of students, including myself, are yet to fully branch out into. I'm sure you'll agree that challenging this idea of students being passive consumers is really central to challenging the narrative and allowing students to be active partners in higher education. And as this discussion continues, the third space is being recognised as an area that goes beyond the four walls of specific institutions and actually brings people of diverse roles together. In an ideal world, ideas of mutual learning and of collaboration would be clear in both student partnership work and in the third space. But in reality, how does the acknowledgement of this third space expand, improve, complicate, or enrich student partnership work? How do the unequal experiences and the diversity of stakeholders in student partnership align with stakeholders in the third space? These are really big questions that Giedre has been tapping into in her own research, and I'm excited to have them further pulled apart and hacked through this next keynote. This keynote will run across 45 minutes, with 35 minutes of presenting and the final 10 minutes reserved for Q&A. You've already engaged in using the chat function this morning, and we'd love for that to continue throughout the keynote. Please feel free to add any questions or comments into the chat and engage with each other in there as well. Questions that are placed into the chat will be picked up and answered at the end. So on that note, I'm going to drop the mic now and hand it over to you, Giedre and Ursula.
Thank you, Lily Rose, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to our keynote, Lemons, Limes and Liminality. My name is Ursula Axel and I am coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation today. I have just completed my degree. It's a double degree in Communications and Social and Political Science and the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation, and this is Giedre.
Good morning and good day or good evening wherever you are. I'm also on the Gadigal land of the Eora Nation today. As Ty and Lily Rose introduced me, I'm senior lecturer at the TD School of the University of Technology, Sydney, where Ursula's transdisciplinary degree is being taught. And next year, we will be welcoming the 10th generation of students to this degree. So that's pretty exciting for us. We love unusual names and acronyms at TD School. Just in case you're wondering, TD stands for transdisciplinary in TD School. And what do we mean when we say creative intelligence? Well, that's a great conversation starter, and I hope it will become clearer as we discuss it today.
When Giedre asked if I wanted to write and present a keynote about liminality with her, I said yes. She then said, great, we need a catchy title and we need to send it in now. Do you have any ideas? This was my first roadblock. I didn't, in fact, have any ideas. I also had no idea what liminality was. I looked around the kitchen and I saw the fruit bowl, which was filled with lemons and limes, and I wrote my response to Giedre. Lemons, limes, and liminality. The title was approved. It was sent to the organisers of this event, published on the website, and then I was asked by Giedre, so what do you mean by lemons, limes, and liminality? It was an example of girl bossing a little too close to the sun, but here we are. And given I can now brag about the fact that I do, in fact, understand liminality, I was also able to find meaning in the title that I suggested.
Yes, so we love lemons and limes, and we think they do have a lot to do with liminality. Paradoxically, they're both sour and yet refreshing. So thinking about lemons and limes, perhaps you're scrunching up your face, or perhaps you're feeling your mouth salivating even as you're thinking about it. So Are these lemons and limes just a digression, an accident, a blip in this keynote? What have they got to do with partnerships? Well, we often say in TD school that serendipity favors the prepared mind. The idea of lemons and limes came to us because we were thinking about liminality. So yes, they can help us understand liminality in partnerships. And here's how. Paul Stannard talks about the concept of spontaneous liminality. It's the idea that some aspects of our lives and experiences throw us temporarily into the state of uncertainty, the state of not knowing. There is a certain openness in these situations. In Stannard's words, quote, "It's like the joker in a pack of cards, or like a blank domino. They have the potential to take on any value depending upon circumstances," end of quote. So our lemons and limes are not nothing in Stannard's words, but an opportunity to create some space for curiosity and anticipation, a chance for the mind to wander, a departure from thinking as usual. And extending this thought, in our keynote today, we will invite you to consider the role of transitions, borders, gaps, voids, and movements between different states and roles in partnerships. In partnerships, the boundaries between us are created and collapsed as we move between our multiple selves as educators and students. It's not just me here and you over there. We encounter each other in the space in between, and we're transformed. Through partnerships, we make the boundaries between us more fluid.
So over my 4 years at university, I have been involved in a number of student leadership roles. This has included formal structures such as the UTS SRC and being the elected student representative for my cohort, as well as informal roles providing feedback to the university. I was also involved in formal leadership positions when on exchange in Glasgow. And throughout these experiences, I have often been quite puzzled when senior university executives ask for student opinions on something and then get frustrated when they aren't met with overwhelming enthusiasm. Now, I understand that my generation aren't anything special. We haven't done anything more or less remarkable than generations that have gone before us. Heck, we're even renowned for not respecting other generations ourselves. However, I do believe that these intergenerational tensions can explain a lot for why young people are not the first to put up their hands to give their opinions on university matters. Now, any young person is acutely aware of the societal perception that their knowledge is inept. To help me articulate it, I did a quick Google search and I searched, "What's wrong with young people?" I was met with an overwhelming response from Google, and these are some of the quotes that Google spat back at me. Daily Mail, 2017, "Millennials are lazy and think basic tasks are beneath them." In Irish Independent, 2017, "Many of the millennials in today's workforce have more confidence than they do competence." The Telegraph, 2015, "Whether it's jobs, property, or just the sheer towering unfairness of the world, millennial complainants are everywhere, ready to give you a rundown of everything their generation has been stifled on. In the way that we once had the greatest generation, we now have the whiniest generation. But really, the only place they've been shortchanged compared to us X's or even the boomers is property." Now, I mentioned before that my generation aren't anything special, and I do stand by that. I don't believe we have done anything in particular to warrant this level of criticism, nor have we done anything to warrant an obscene level of praise. It has always been the case that young people have been the generational punching bag of societal issues. It is always the fault of the naive. Now, I needn't ask you to cast your minds back too far to remind you of this quotation from the Washington Post in 1993. What really distinguishes this generation from those before it is that it's the first generation in American history to live so well and complain so bitterly about it. But this general societal dislike of young people goes back even further. In the words of Aristotle from 4th century BC, they, young people, think they know everything and are always quite sure about it. Now, my concern with the criticism of young people is not that we are undeserving of these statements. History tells us that regardless of what generation you are, if you are the young ones, we won't like you very much. Your opinion isn't particularly important to us. You are naive, too sensitive. You don't understand the meaning of hard work, and for some bizarre reason, you seem to think that you are right. However, if we speak about young people like this, with such disregard and such strong assumptions that they know nothing, then why do we expect them to put their hand up and provide feedback to the university when it suits the university? You see, we have created such a strong societal structure that young people don't know when the older generations do, that I don't believe it is as simple as saying, well, now we are ready to hear from you. It takes courage to speak up, true courage. And if we continue to perpetuate these ideals that young people are entitled or privileged or naive, then young people are not just fighting personal insecurities anymore. They are also fighting the internalization of these concepts, the idea that I am young and therefore my opinion doesn't matter. But perhaps what is most concerning in all of this is that out of the entire student cohort, the few that do speak up are those that come from significant privilege.
Well, if this is the starting point for our student-staff partnerships in our institutions, we got our work cut out for us. So let's admit it, we're swimming against the current and we're working against the prevailing view that young people's opinions are not valid. And as Ursula points out, it's even more difficult if we seek to engage with the views of students who have been traditionally excluded from the privileged realm of higher education. So whilst we worry as educators that we seem to end up engaging the usual suspects in our partnership initiatives, the privileged, the already well off, those who education system has already served very well, we struggle to engage the other voices. You need to turn up to influence the institution. And those who don't turn up are usually the ones who historically have been excluded and marginalized. The usual suspects, but of a different kind. And we should really thank Peter, Clem, Brooke, and May for Evelyn, for laying the groundwork for our keynote today, because we're picking up much of the conversation about the paradoxes of purpose, particularity, power, and paradigm they outlined yesterday. So as it was discussed yesterday, in the SAP community, we're busy establishing structures and infrastructures to work against these structural injustices and societal perceptions about young people. We argue for funding and fight to establish paid positions in universities to do partnership work. Many of us will be here today because we're probably employed in some capacity to do this work. We want to shake things up and we want to level the playing field just a little bit so that students can get involved and so that different voices and perspectives can be heard and taken seriously. And we often define the value of partnerships as the possibility to learn from difference. So I would like to expand on the paradox of particularity that Peter introduced yesterday. When we create partnership initiatives, do we create a container for a generic possibility for student voice to be heard, an empty box, the kind where you can insert your student opinion, any student will do? If that's how we go about it, how is the category of student partner defined? As staff members, which aspects of studentness do we see of being as being of value? Do we see all student perspectives and dispositions as equally valuable? Are some students more suitable for partnerships than others? Do we seek out specific characteristics and tap some students on the shoulder, or do we put a call out and see who responds? Do we then vet the students who come forth? It was interesting to hear yesterday that Clem, Evelyn, and Brooke weren't sure initially why they were picked and hired and what they could bring into this partnership space.
In the times that we do ask to hear from students, their opinions are often taken in a slightly different light. In preparation for today's talk, I spoke with some friends at uni about their experiences providing feedback to the university. One of my peers recalled a time when she was working at UTS and a lecturer said to her, "Would you mind staying back today? We are having a meeting on student-related issues and we need to have a student representative there." This was fine. She was able to stay back. She attended the meeting, entering a boardroom of 12 university staff and academics, and herself, the only student. These were the ratios for a conversation about student issues. Now, I'm grateful to be in a university that champions student perspectives. However, when the ratio of staff to student in a meeting room is 12:1, then this is not an environment that encourages conversation, nor is it one that enables confidence in the student. As I said before, as young people, we internalize this idea that our opinions are not credible due to our age and consequently lack of life experience. Therefore, if you put one student in a room of 12 adults, they are needing to muster up a lot of courage to speak with honesty.
Many of us would agree probably that this wasn't a partnership situation at all, although I think institutionally this initiative was framed as a student-staff partnership. But I suspect that a variation of this experience might also play out in our best designed partnerships. We need to spend time thinking about lemons and limes, how they are the same, but also different, and examine more closely how difference plays out in student-staff partnerships. So in Ursula's friend's example, the student perspective mattered because it was sufficiently different from the staff members. It was unique in that sense. We can learn from it. But if we think about difference in this instrumental way, the only thing that matters is that it is a student perspective. It didn't matter which student was saying it. So our provocation today is, if we see partnership as an encounter with difference, it matters, or at least it should matter who the student and the staff members actually are. In the SAP community, we often talk about partnerships being a process, not an outcome. We'd like to propose today that partnership is also not a structure. It is a relationship that unfolds as we encounter each other, as we listen, hear, sense, and respond. If we see partnerships as an unfolding relationship, the duality of student-staff roles becomes less easy to define as new responsibilities and identities emerge for each of us through a partnership process. Returning to the paradox of purpose from yesterday's keynote, the question of why we're engaged in partnerships. In our view, it's precisely to create situations where things can be configured differently, where the traditional rules can be suspended temporarily, so that something new can emerge. So through partnerships, we can redraw the boundaries between staff and students quite differently. We're not quite students and not quite educators anymore. We encounter each other and we're transformed through this partnership process. And this is where we find the notion of liminality helpful.
Now, I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this concept of liminality or being in a liminal space. I hadn't 4 years ago until I started my degree. Then, over the course of 4 years, I heard the term thrown around constantly. Statements like, this kind of learning would not be possible if we weren't in a liminal space, and, well, that's the beauty of liminality. Or questions like, how does liminality encourage transformative learning? If you haven't encountered the term liminality before, you are not alone. I only learned what it meant so I could do this keynote. However, here is a quick rundown of what I learned. Liminality was originally an anthropological term. You're probably familiar with the idea of rites of passage or initiations that signify a transition from one stage of life to another, such as from childhood to adulthood. Individuals are separated from their current roles and taken into the liminal space where their existence becomes ambiguous, neither here nor there. It is within the liminal space that one leaps from the known to the unknown and returns to the society with new roles and responsibilities. They are transformed. To me, it is the space between not yet understanding and understanding. Put simply, it is that slightly uncomfortable space you sit in right before a moment of discovery. Alison Cook-Sather and Peter Felton discuss liminality as a key condition in student-staff partnerships. It is about the preparedness by the different parties to step out of their known role and into the liminal space to encounter one another in order to be transformed. In my non-academic language, liminality is a time for learning as you move from one area of not knowing to one of understanding, where rules and preconceived ideas dissipate and space opens up for greater learnings.
So it is important to note that we come to the partnership practices through the lens of transdisciplinary education, which is an adjacent field to students as partners. It was interesting to hear how at WSU, where you are shifting much more into the space as well. So when we talk about transdisciplinarity, we mean learning by engaging with real-world challenges and working not only with knowledges from across different disciplines, but also beyond academic disciplines, such as practical knowledges, lived experiences, indigenous perspectives, and so on. The need for transdisciplinary learning was first mentioned in the 1970s in response to the complex challenges that began to emerge in the globalized world. Challenges that were not possible to address through the lens of a single discipline. So we can think effects of climate change, global inequalities, or even the pandemic, which we just all experience. The point of transdisciplinary encounters is to see the complex problems we're stuck in through the eyes of others. The fact is, we need to listen and hear differently to make any progress on these challenges. This attentiveness to difference is how we think about learning in TD school as well. Our students are engaged in experiential and collaborative learning, and they get to work on industry and community partner challenges for which answers and solutions don't exist yet. Students come together from every corner of the university. In the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation, we have students from 25 different degrees. So the transdisciplinary partnerships we discussed today are embedded in the curriculum. They're not separate initiatives.
By nature, transdisciplinarity invites new ways of knowing. It champions this idea that all knowledges are equal and that all need to be provided with the space to be heard. This approach to learning is what creates the environment for effective student partnership. By challenging the conventions and assumptions about what should happen in university learning, it is possible to create a new space, a space for creativity and participation. We call this the third space. Now, partnerships are implicit in everything we do in this transdisciplinary third space. It is not just about student opinion or satisfaction surveys, and it is not just about being able to speak through student representatives. It matters not that the students are speaking, but who the students are as well. We are seeing the results of our actions every day as we, both the students and staff, learn in this space. As I mentioned previously, I've just completed the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation. We affectionately call it BCII. It's a national and international award-winning degree, and Giedre, I think, will pop some links in the chat for you now if you wanted to look into it in more detail. Most simply put, it is a degree in problem solving. Students work together to respond to challenges posed by industry partners. One of my favorite parts of the degree are the people that it attracts, both students and staff. When Giedre and I first met to discuss our keynote speech, I assumed we would meet in her office. As a university student, it is an exciting time when you are invited to meet with university staff, as it often means you're invited into spaces only accessible with a staff card. There's biscuits and tea and coffee and a few microwaves to choose from that aren't already in use. It is thrilling. However, Giedre suggested we met in the student space. Usually, I would be disappointed by such a notion, but for the BCII, we are allocated an entire floor. It's an open space where students can come and go as they please and work on any project of their choosing. Although we don't have a biscuit jar, we do have butcher's paper and textures and very good vibes. Of course, it came as no surprise that Giedre wanted to meet in this space. To me, it was an example of how I believe staff in the TD school genuinely see students as their intellectual equals. When we met in the student space, there were 4 other students there working on their own projects. Thankfully for me, BCII students tend to be very easily distracted, and they seemed interested in Giedre and my conversation. I asked them, what makes BCII BCII? And this is what they came up with. There is no sense of perfectionism. There is a sense of freedom. It is all about problem solving and opportunity seeking. There is a holistic approach to education. It is all about collaborative work. You are safe to fail. We trust the process. You learn to love the problem, not the solution. There is an attitude of so what and what if. There is a strong sense of community, both physically because we have a place to be, but also digitally through our online Facebook group. There is a strong sense of authenticity. You are encouraged to work on what feels right for you. The enthusiasm of my peers to jump up and have a discussion with Giedre and myself about this degree leads to our first paradox. That is, the more you listen to students, the louder they get. Now, typically, when you don't feel you are being heard, you feel a need to get louder. You raise your voice in response to a silent government on climate change, and you use your inside voice when you feel that you are being heard. Yet in this space, the more we as students are listened to by university staff, the louder we seem to get. So I then asked my peers, do you feel confident to provide feedback to lecturers in BCII? They replied yes. I asked them, what is it about this space that allows for that kind of confidence? And this is what they responded with. I'm not just a student, I am me. It matters that I am here and that I am providing feedback, not just any other student. When I do provide feedback, I see direct change. There is a sense of feedback loop between us, the students, and the staff. I completed a subject earlier this year where the lecturer said she wanted us to all design the class together. So before the semester began, we all met and discussed what we wanted to get out of the subject, and then she went and prepared the subject based on this feedback. At the end of each day, she would ask for more feedback and alter each lesson the next day to respond to this. It was amazing, and I felt really heard. And finally, there is an embodied presence in this space. Something happens when you walk into this space and you know that in this room, in this degree, you matter. Now, there is just a sense of confidence, I think, that this degree instills in us, although I am probably quite biased. This confidence helps in speaking up, but it plays out into other areas of life too. After 4 years of studying this degree and being asked, okay, but what does that actually make you at the end? Or what will you be at the end of this at many a family of function? My answer is always, well, I don't know. And much to their surprise, I'm comfortable with that answer. As students, we don't always know the answer. We don't always know the destination, but we do dream big.
And the openness that exists in the BCI is quite profound. So we often say that no student graduates the same. And it's not because they're each being taught something different, but because they make their own journey. They study different degrees across the whole university and pursue many projects of their passion. Through learning in this liminal third space of the BCI, students graduate as young professionals ready to take responsibility for their contribution to the world. We do have a capstone subject in the BCI. When we were designing the course, we wanted to call it a cliffhanger. We wondered how this might go down in the university course approval committee and went the safe way. We want students to graduate unfinished on purpose, thinking about and plotting their next adventure, rather than feeling smug about the glossy piece of paper that they have acquired. Over to you.
Thank you. Our next paradox is, the more you trust students, the more they achieve. Usually when something is daunting, challenging, or high risk, the task is broken down into smaller, manageable tasks. In the university structure, this breakdown is usually created by the lecturer. You take baby steps. However, in BCII, students work directly with the larger task pitched to us by the industry partner. It is when we are handled the more challenging task that we are able to achieve more. Each school runs on a theme from a different industry partner. We've had pitches from the New South Wales Department of Education, Google, PwC, City of Sydney, and over 500 others. I still remember the shock of my first school in my very first year of university when we were allowed to talk to senior people in these businesses. But I'm just a uni student, I thought to myself. The reality of pitches at the end of these projects always far exceeds student, staff, and industry expectations. It is not because the students in this degree are unlike any others, but it is just because more is expected of us. More trust was instilled within us, and I believe that this trust is what encourages the feedback loop with our academic staff.
And of course, make no mistake, it is really scary for the staff to step into this uncertain space between the safe and predictable university structures and the messy real-world challenges that our external industry and community partners work with. Just this semester, I had a conversation with one of our partners who asked, what kind of students will we get? Will they be good? Will we have to watch over the work because we don't really have the time? And I assured them immediately that the experience was going to be amazing. I did have a bit of a sinking feeling saying it. We didn't actually know which of the 119 students they will work with, let alone if any student would even choose to work on this project. But sure enough, at mid-semester check-in, the industry partner said they could not believe the passion and commitment that the students brought to the project. So as educators in the BCII, we have to trust that students will rise to the occasion. We don't know and can't guarantee that they will step up, but we have to trust that they will. Gerd Biester calls this the beautiful risk of education. The best we can do is invite students into this liminal space. It just so happens that the most profound learning takes place in the liminal space. Many of you working in the partnership space will recognize this paradox of needing to trust the students before knowing whether anything will come out of it. But this trust has to be there for anything to happen at all.
This paradox has a reverse side. If you give structure, you get structure. It came as a huge shock to me when I scored myself my very first fancy title in the workplace, marketing coordinator. In this role, I had the responsibility of ordering flowers and booking meeting rooms. I was notoriously bad at this job. In my work, I was achieving up to what was expected of me, and I couldn't see a way to go above and beyond in this role. I found that what was expected of me in the workplace was far less than what was expected of me at uni, and I found it almost impossible to find a way to be outstanding in this role. At the end of the day, how well can one order flowers, or coffee, or shred paper? And although paper shredders do instill a level of glee in me that I cannot quite articulate, when tasks were laid out for me one after the other, all I did was complete each task one after the other. May I remind you, if you give structure, you get structure.
But you do need some structure. You can't always be in the liminal state. In one of the papers we have written with colleagues and students, we discussed the need for balance between stability and flux in these types of creative education spaces. Even in liminal spaces, we need to maintain an overall narrative and a sense of purpose, whilst at the same time we work to destabilize aspects of our thinking and practices. It is about stepping in and stepping out of liminality. Over the years, we've discovered the final partnership paradox we wish to discuss today. The better you're at it, the worse you're at it. There is something about the thrill of not knowing what will happen. That first encounter with students, we're standing at the edge of what's familiar to us. What will it be like? As staff members, we think, last year we had such an incredible experience. Surely it was a fluke. It won't happen again. Yet every single cohort in the BCI has surprised me and pushed my thinking in new directions. Even with the 10th cohort of the BCI starting next year, I know that something unexpected and unique will emerge as we learn together. The paradox is that if we already anticipate what will happen in our encounter with students, we're not really opening the door to liminality. To be in partnership is to be interrupted, to be addressed, and to be put into question by our students. And I'm drawing on Gerd Biester again in saying this. So the better you're at it, the worse you're at it. This applies to both staff and students. We should strive to be perpetually bad at it. I think in yesterday's keynote, Brooke was talking about feeling wobbly in the partnership space. Not being good at it means that we can keep our eyes and ears and hearts truly open to encounter each other. One of the most important things that we have observed about partnership spaces is that they cannot be constructed or forced into being. We cannot engineer them. Instead, they can be encouraged, tended to, and guided, but are usually spoiled when we attempt to control them.
I spoke earlier about the need for students to be courageous, to stand up and speak. However, I neglected to mention the courage we also need from our university staff. We would like to conclude with a commonly known quote that in many ways summarizes our call to action, our call for courage. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is also what it takes to sit down and listen. Thank you so much for listening, and we would like to open the floor to questions.
What a wonderful keynote, Ursula and Giedre. If you're paying attention at all to the chat, there's some very interesting conversations going on. So I'm just going to give a minute for silent applause that none of us can see while people just say congratulations to you. So let that sit for a bit. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Samir, who's going to kind of put to you some of the questions from the chat and add his own view to it. All right, Samir.
Well, thank you, Ty and Giedre, Ursula. That was a fantastic presentation. You've got my mind rumbling for a lot of discussion, which unfortunately we have limitations of time, but I will certainly ask a question. Leah Bladge Ward, I hope I said that correctly, asked a very interesting question in the chat, and she was wondering whether there was this third neutral space where both of you could have actually met, not fully space and not a fully student space either. Do you have a response to that?
I suppose we could have, because we met in the BCII specific space, so I suppose we could have met in a regular student space, or I don't know, a cafe. I think it's pretty...
Cafe would have been nice.
Yeah, cafe. I suppose I feel like it's pretty segregated, but between staff space and student space. But yeah, maybe a cafe.
Yeah, I feel like that space is actually that third space. So, you know, it's student space because they can come and go as they please, but really it is not the kind of university space. It doesn't have that vibe. It has lots of color and, you know, it's an open floor space. There's a kitchenette, there's couches, and it's, you know, ping pong tables. So people come and hang out. So I feel like, in a way, the university, by allocating that space and creating that sort of, you know, staff want to go there. Actually, we want to go there and we want to work from there as well, because it just has this really great vibe. So, and I think partly it's also, you know, some people might think, okay, well, this is quite a specific, unusual situation. You have that space to play in. But I think it helps. But I also feel that, you know, for the longest time, we also didn't have it and operated from all the university spaces as usual. And we still had that feeling of third space, which is basically that unusual different space that is not quite university and not quite work or external world.
Yeah, I like the idea if we can all have a space where both staff and students can work together. And I like Ursula's point, maybe a cafe, because a cafe does seem very welcoming in that respect. We can have both students and staff coming together. I noticed in the chat a lot about this question of age, you know, is age, and like, I will steal a point from Clem, who wrote, is age actually a number? And I think Kelly Matthews also wrote as well, are all students actually young? So I have, a question can be formed from that, and we can say, like, how do we invite students from all backgrounds and all age disciplines into partnership? You know, and I'm going to add my own flavor to that as well, and say that, do we need to have like a category or a checklist on who we hire to partner in order to fill those gaps, you know, so we can get everyone's viewpoint and, you know, allow everyone to work together?
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting point, because I think sort of what we're pointing towards in the keynote is that you have this added level of complexity when you're drawing on students who are young, that they sort of go, well, I don't know if you're going to want my opinion because I'm young and this is all the rhetoric around young people's opinions. But I think there's a whole other complexity when you have mature age students, which I technically am actually, because I started uni at 21, mature age students who, where there's this sense of, well, I'm not fresh out of school like everyone else, and so maybe my opinion isn't going to be needed because it's not the same as the bulk. So I think that I think it's a really interesting point, Samir, and probably there is space to have, yeah, almost quotas on who we hire in these student partnership positions, because I do think that there is a need to actually really push and encourage diversity. Again, there's always the issue in student partnerships that it's the same sorts of people that put up their hand to do it. So yes, I think the question about age is a good one in that space.
Yeah. And we have to say that the BCI is an undergrad degree, so it is school leavers and kind of a very traditional cohort of students. But having said that, since 2020, we also have a postgraduate degree in creative intelligence and strategic innovation. And it's almost in response to all the industry partners going back to us and saying, well, we'd love to study something like that. We'd love to learn all this, but we kind of don't really feel like we could study an undergrad degree again. Why isn't there something for us? So we now have this really interesting opportunity to have the masters, the postgrad, all basically they're our partners who turn up either first in the BCI or then become partners later. So they're all professionals working in, their day jobs, and yet we are meeting in kind of a similar kind of third space in this postgrad space. And then we also meet as the broader community of TD School, where these postgrad students might play the role of an external industry partner. So they actually also have questions. They come to these partnerships and relationships with questions that they want to explore and kind of be challenged and troubled by that encounter with students.
Thanks, Giedre. I'm going to take the next question here. One of the points you made that really resonated with me is the idea of partnership being a relationship that unfolds, not a structure. Yet many of us are in the privileged position of trying to design partnership initiatives that have some form of intention. The question I want to put to you is probably a hard one, so feel free to shirk it. It's too hard. For me, it's the question of how much structure is enough.
Yes, I knew Ty is going to be a difficult one to ask you for an easy question. I think, so we do need structure. So there has to be intent and purpose and a sense of kind of the overall frame of what you're trying to do. But I guess the substance, the content, the actual trajectories that people take, we can leave openness within it. And I think this idea, so I guess just to bring up the example that we discussed but didn't end up including in the keynote, was the beginning of this spring semester when Ursula came to me and said, well, last semester we saw these sort of things unfold in the cohort, and I think we'd like to do something that actually explores the relational aspects of our cohort and how we connect with each other, because I think something is happening, the pattern is emerging that doesn't seem right. And at the time I had all my, the assessments and kind of the session plan and the subject outline, everything was kind of neatly laid out. I did it last year. I felt like, okay, I got it in hand. It's going to be smooth sailing. And kind of we have that feeling of both like, oh, of course we need to, address this, and the kind of feeling, do I need to kind of open everything up again? And of course we did, of course we opened aspects of it, and then we created spaces within kind of the weekly schedule for students to come in and do something, which was actually, as the pandemic hit and Sydney went into lockdown, that became almost kind of like not having that physical space to hang out. That relational aspect was really something that then students brought into the virtual space, and you needed that space for something to happen. I don't know, Ursula, if you have a...
Well, it was interesting. So last semester, and part of the reason I went to Giedre to discuss how second semester would run was that a lot of the feedback from the students was that there wasn't enough structure in semester one. So there was a really laid back approach taken to it, and that it was sort of, this is your project, you have the whole semester to work on it, do as you please. And I think it really pushed students out of their comfort zone to the point where people weren't productive, and it was so far out of our comfort zones that we weren't able to get into the rhythm of university, because it is usually such a structured environment. And so it went too far in the other direction, where it was sort of, you're meant to be at uni on these 3 days, but there's not necessarily going to be classes run. It's more you can come into this space and work on your project. And it was really sort of unstructured in that way, and it didn't work. And a lot of students sort of push back on that and say, well, I want a bit of structure. So I think it's almost about having goalposts for students and having different deadlines and things like that, but within that allowing for their own creativity and their own interpretation of the assessment brief, I think is my view on how it works well for, not do this, then this, then this, then this, but do hit this deadline.
Thanks, Ursula. I think there's some really interesting conversation in the chat about whether the library is the neutral space that we seek. And my colleague Fiona Salisbury, I think, might be in the room and will have a lot to say about that. there's also a conversation about co-op spaces, being spaces where we might kind of encounter each other and seek each other. That tension about whether students can do staff, can engage in partnership without staff setting the groundwork for it is one we face here at Western Sydney as well. So I appreciate the kind of conversation around that. I am going to, yes, but you do have to be quiet. I am going to draw the Q&A to a close now so that we can keep the time. I want to offer my thanks, and in a minute we'll hand back to Lily Rose, who will be more formal than me about it. But again, please, for those of you who we can't see, please put your comments and acknowledgements in the chat to show your appreciation for a fabulous keynote. All right, I'm going to hand back to Lily Rose now, who's going to take us out into the next session. Thanks, Lily Rose.
Thank you so much to our wonderful keynote speakers for sharing such a thought-provoking and challenging presentation. And thank you to all of you for your valuable questions and contributions in our last Q&A session. I'd now like to hand over to one of my Western Sydney student partner colleagues, Shivani Suresh. Shivani will give us a rundown of the rest of the day, including the hackathon, and what we can expect in the next session. Over to you now, Shivani.
Thank you, Lily Rose, and a very good morning, everyone. Thank you, Giedre and Ursula, for kicking us off in such a splendid way. You definitely have given us a zesty taste of what's coming ahead. By now, some of you may have seen me and gotten used to my puns and maybe suffered from secondhand embarrassment. But for those who are seeing me online for the first time, welcome to the roundtable. My name is Shivani Suresh. I am one of your hosts, a 21C student curriculum partner, and a master's in health science student here at Western. And I am here to give a brief explanation about what the rest of today will look like. Today is day 2 of the Roundtable Conference. Today we come together as hackers. So this means our 5 hacks are going to be live in just about an hour. For those who are unaware, we have a series of 5 parallel hacks organized for today, at the end of which your group will create an artifact. An artifact is an evidence of partnership thinking you've done together. And here we tackle together some very interesting partnership paradoxes. We co-create things together, and what happens after is great ideas and conversations and connections come out of it. Yesterday was an exceptional reminder of that for me. That being said, I want to dive straight into the hacks we have today. Hack 1, preparing for partnership, creating and using student personas to support inclusive project design. The facilitators are Molly Dollinger and Jared Hurst from Deakin University, and Belinda D'Angelo and Alice Jensen from La Trobe University. Hack 2, making a manifesto, next steps in addressing equity issues, who, why, and how. This hack is facilitated by Amani Bell and Meenakshi Krishnaraj from University of Sydney. Hack 3, the 3 X's, expertise, experience, and expectations. Here, your facilitators will join you to create shareable, compelling social media content about the 3 X's in SAP partnerships. Miriam Bennett and Helen Chong Gum from Victoria University will be leading this hack. Hack 4, untangling invisible power structures, devising partnership rituals. Today's keynotes, Giedre Clegete and Ursula Axel, are running this one. And last but not the least, Hack 5, everyone hates group projects. How can we scale partnerships effectively? Can partnerships and projects scale whilst remaining effective and inclusive? And this one's run by Matt Brett, Meg McManus, and Cass Baptist from Deakin University. As you can see, all of the hacks have different artifacts that they will set out to co-create. And we will make sure we create a beautiful archive of all of it so everyone can see it and use it for your own partnership practices. For those who have already registered for a hack, if you want a rerun of what I said, I strongly recommend you to visit the Day 2 channel on MS Teams, where you'll get access to the Hackathon Handbook. Have a look through it and make sure you visit your private hack channels that you have been added to, so you access more information and instructions regarding your hack. And most importantly, access the Zoom links for your hacks. The hack sessions start promptly at 10:30 a.m. today and goes until 1:15 p.m. with a break in between. Just to repeat the last important point, the Zoom links to your hacks are available in your private hack channels, which you will have access to only if you have registered. For those who haven't registered for the hacks, we hope you come back for research clinics tomorrow. Tomorrow we come together as researchers, and registrations are open now. For today, the networking channel and the Twitter hashtag SAP Roundtable 21 will still be open all the time. Just some final comments before I leave you for an early break. Stay hydrated, folks, and make sure you have fun today. Also, don't forget to give yourself a little stretch whenever you want to. And if you have any questions, we are the minions in the background, and we've got the black roundtable profile logo, and we're right here to help you. Just pop it into the Ask a Question channel, and we'll be there to help. That being said, I hope you all enjoy the rest of today. Have fun. Thank you.